Drenching the elderly janitor by dumping her iced coffee right over his head, Courtney sneered as the dark brown liquid streamed down his faded gray uniform. She flicked a $10 bill into the puddle, her mocking voice echoing across the grand lobby of Meridian Capital. Consider that a tip for your pathetic, agonizing slowness. Take it and buy some soap, you reeking old man. A chorus of snickers erupted from the 6 employees nearby. Not a single soul showed a shred of mercy. Yet the 68-year-old man didn't flinch. He calmly leaned down, pinching the soaked bill between 2 fingers. Instead of showing submission, he looked up, locking eyes with Courtney. His gaze was so piercingly cold that it sent an involuntary shiver down her spine as he spoke. "Good morning, ma'am. I'll make sure this place is cleaned." Dot spotless, they strutted away, completely oblivious that the very man they just degraded held their entire financial survival in his hands. In exactly 4 days, payday arrives, and the name at the absolute bottom of their multi-million-dollar paychecks, a name they've seen 1,000 times but never cared to look up, will finally reveal itself. Raymond Ellison, the supreme founding billionaire who has been ghosting the company for 31 years. On that day, a mass firing will begin, and they will finally learn the true price of a cup of coffee. They had all seen it, they had all signed paperwork acknowledging him, and not one of them had ever tried to connect the quiet old black man with the limp and the mop to the signature at the bottom of their lives. His name was Raymond Ellison. He was 71 years old, he owned 63% of the company, and he had been cleaning their floors for 11 years. Only 4 people inside the building knew the truth. The first was Constance Adler, his executive assistant of 26 years, a woman who greeted him each morning through the service entrance with a thermos of black coffee and kept his secret with the gravity of a sworn oath. The second was Bernard Park, the chairman of the board, who called Raymond every Thursday evening to review the week. The third was Marcus Webb, the overnight security supervisor, a former Marine who recognized discipline when he saw it and had never once asked a question he didn't already know the answer to. Marcus gave Raymond a single nod every morning at 5:10 when he badged in. Raymond nodded back. The fourth was a woman named Gloria C. Sims, who ran the mailroom and had figured it out on her own about 3 years in, when she noticed that Raymond always seemed to pick floors on days when complaints had been filed. She never said a word to anyone, but every so often she would leave a cup of coffee on his cart with a yellow sticky note that said only, "Still watching." Still proud, Raymond kept every one of those notes in a small brass tin inside his locker. Why did he do it? Why did the man who built Meridian Capital from nothing, a man with a house in the West End and a seat on 2 university boards, spend his mornings emptying trash cans and scrubbing grout lines? The answer was a woman named Harriet Ellison, his grandmother. In 1961, in a department store in downtown Richmond, Harriet Ellison, 44 years old, a black custodial worker who raised 4 grandchildren on one salary, was mopping the floor of the women's restroom when a floor manager walked in with 2 younger employees. He looked at the floor, he looked at Harriet, he said, "Start over and use the corners this time." He hadn't looked at her face once. She started over. His grandmother never raised her voice. She never cried at work. She came home, made dinner, braided the girl's hair, and helped Raymond with his arithmetic homework at the kitchen table. She smelled like industrial cleaner and gardenia lotion, and she was, to Raymond's mind, the most dignified human being he had ever known. She died of a stroke in 1988, sitting in her recliner at 6 in the morning with a cup of tea going cold on the side table. Raymond was 29. He was 2 years into building Meridian. He sat next to her in the hospital for 6 hours before the machine stopped. He held her hand and he thought about every floor she had ever cleaned and how nobody who ever walked across those floors had known her name. He decided they would know his. He decided he would build something different, run it differently, and he would never stop walking the floors himself. Because, as Harriet used to say, you can dress a man up in whatever title you like, but you want to know what he's made of, watch how he treats the person with the mop. Raymond had been watching for 31 years. Every Monday he chose a different floor. He put on the gray uniform, loaded his cart, and went to work. He listened to how people spoke to each other when they thought power wasn't watching. He noticed who held the elevator door and who let it close. He noticed who left their dishes in the sink and who cleaned up after themselves. He took no notes. He had a remarkable memory. And for the past 6 months, Raymond had been using that memory to build something else entirely. 3 vendors, invoices that didn't match purchase orders, wire transfers routed through a third-party accounting service that had been incorporated in Delaware 11 months ago. Someone at Meridian was siphoning money. Not recklessly, carefully. The kind of carefully that assumed no one was paying close enough attention. Raymond was always paying attention. This particular Monday, he chose the 11th floor, operations and client services. He had no idea that a woman named Ashley Brennan was about to make the decision that would define the rest of her professional life. And Friday, of course, was payday. Ashley Brennan was 31 years old, senior operations manager, Princeton undergrad, Wharton MBA. A mind so sharp she sometimes finished other people's sentences before they realized they hadn't finished a thought. She had been at Meridian 4 years and had been promoted twice. She wore the kind of confidence that filled doorways. She also wore, on that Monday morning, a genuine and bottomless contempt for people she considered beneath her. She walked into the 11th floor break room at 7:51 carrying a large iced coffee and found Raymond wiping down the counter near the sink. He was moving slowly. His left hip had been bad since winter. Ashley stopped, looked at the nearly spotless counter, looked at Raymond. And then, with precision that suggested she had done this kind of things before, she tilted her cup and released a long, deliberate stream of coffee across the surface he had just cleaned. "Looks like you missed a spot," she said. Raymond set down his cloth, looked at the counter, looked at her. "Morning, ma'am. I'll take care of that. You'll want to be quicker about it. I have people coming in here for a department meeting at 9, and I need this presentable." She looked at his cart, then at him with an expression that suggested she found both offensive. "Actually, do you know what? While you're at it, the men's restroom on this floor smells like a bus terminal. I've put in 3 maintenance requests. 3. Nobody's done anything." She said it the way people say things to walls. Raymond said, "I'll handle it personally, ma'am." She picked up her cup, now mostly empty, looked at the spreading coffee puddle, and said, "See that you do." She walked out. 2 minutes later, she reappeared at the doorway, with her phone raised. She filmed him cleaning. She lowered the phone. She was smiling the way people smile at something they find privately satisfying. "Carry on," she said, and left. By 9:15, she had shown the video to 3 members of her department during a pre-meeting coffee run. One of them, a young man named Derek Cho, 26 years old, 3rd week on the job, laughed the first time and then went quiet and stared at his shoes for the rest of the morning. He would think about those seconds for a long time afterward. The others were not so restrained. Brandon Wyatt, 34, senior analyst, the kind of man who wore his confidence like a second blazer, watched the video and laughed loud enough to draw looks from 2 cubicles over. Then he pushed back from his desk, walked to the hallway, and found Raymond pushing his cart toward the service corridor. "Hey, old-timer," he said, "you missed the men's room on floor 11. 3rd time this month, isn't it?" It wasn't. Raymond had cleaned it the previous Friday. Brandon knew this because he had not been in the office the previous Friday. He was on a golf trip. He didn't know what he was talking about. He was simply talking. "I'm heading there now, sir," Raymond said. Brandon fell into step beside him, hands in his pockets. "How old are you anyway? 70? 75? Don't they have mandatory retirement for this kind of thing?" He glanced down at Raymond's left hand and the slight drag in his gait. "You doing okay there, Chief? Hate to see you go down on a wet floor. Big liability issue." He said this with the particular tone of a man who believes concern and cruelty are interchangeable when aimed at the right target. Raymond did not stop walking. "I appreciate the thought, sir." Brandon waited until Raymond turned the corner. Then he went back to Ashley's desk, where 3 of them were reviewing a presentation. He said he didn't even react. "Like a dog that's been kicked so many times it doesn't bother anymore," Ashley laughed. The presentation moved on. Nobody said anything. In the cubicle 2 rows over, a woman named Patricia Owens sat very still. She was 47, a mid-level compliance coordinator, 18 years at Meridian. She had heard everything. Her hand was on her telephone. She held it there for a long moment, pressing lightly the way you press a wound. Then she pulled her hand back and looked at her screen. She had a daughter in college. She had a review coming up in 3 weeks. She told herself someone else would say something. She knew no one would, and then, because the universe sometimes works by accumulation rather than by single events, it got worse. At 12:40, Raymond was collecting trash from the hallway bins near the copy room when Ashley emerged from a conference call, still on her earpiece, radiating the particular impatience of a person whose time is being wasted. She walked past him without breaking stride and, without a word, pushed his trash cart sideways with both hands as she passed. The cart didn't fall, but the bin liners shifted, and the smaller recycling container tipped and spilled across the carpet. Paper, an empty yogurt cup, 3 crushed coffee cups. Ashley didn't look back. She kept walking, her voice never breaking from her call. No, tell Marcus the report needs to go out by end of day. I don't care what he says about the projections end of day. Raymond stood looking at the mess on the floor. He was quiet for a moment. He pressed his lips together once. That was all. Then he bent down slowly and started picking up the paper one sheet at a time. Derek Cho came around the corner and stopped. He looked at the spilled bin. He looked at Raymond on the floor. He looked at the direction Ashley had gone. Then he crouched down beside Raymond and started picking up paper without being asked. He didn't say anything. He just collected 3 or 4 sheets, placed them in the bin, stood, and walked away. He never met Raymond's eyes. Raymond watched him go and allowed himself one small nod at the floor. That was Wednesday. But Wednesday was not done. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Raymond was mopping the corridor near the conference rooms on the 11th floor when Ashley came out of a long client call, still visibly irritated, phone in one hand and a printed report in the other. She saw Raymond working near the door and stopped. She looked at the wet floor. She looked at the wet floor sign. She looked at Raymond, and then she stepped deliberately into the section he had just mopped, tracking through it in her heels, leaving 2 clear signs of footprints across the clean surface. She did not look back. "You're going to want to get that," Brandon said from behind her, coming out of the same meeting room, looking at Raymond with the particular smile of a man who enjoys a joke most when someone else is the punchline. Raymond looked at the footprints. He set his mop in the bucket. He looked up at Brandon. "Thank you, sir," he said. Brandon laughed. He said to nobody in particular, "You know what I respect? Commitment to the craft." He clapped Raymond once on the shoulder as he passed, the way someone pats a good dog, and walked on. The corridor was empty, except for Raymond and the wet floor sign. Raymond stood for a moment in the quiet. He pressed his thumbnail into the pad of his index finger and held it there until the white crescent faded back to brown. Then he dipped the mop into the bucket, wrung it, and started over. What Raymond had seen across 11 years of Monday mornings, and increasingly across all 5 days of the week, was not just rudeness. It was pattern. Ashley Brennan had joined the firm 4 years ago, and within 6 months, 3 members of the custodial staff had requested transfers off the 11th floor. He knew because Constance had quietly forwarded him the transfer requests, flagging them without comment. One of those employees, a 58-year-old man named George Torres, had written in his transfer request that he no longer felt safe on the floor. Not physically, something else. He wrote, "I do not feel like a person when I am there." Raymond had read that form 6 times. He had been building a case, not just about the money, which was Grant Holloway's crime. Wait, that name belongs to a different story. Here the fraud belonged to a man named Kyle Sutherland, 43, Chief Operating Officer, 6 years at Meridian, the kind of executive who spoke in metrics and smiled with the precision of a man who had practiced in the mirror. Kyle had been routing vendor overpayments through a shell company called Briarwood Consulting LLC, incorporated the previous February, owned by a relative. $3,400,000 over 8 months. Raymond had every receipt, every wire record, every email forwarded by Constance through a separate encrypted account. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit had been quietly briefed 2 weeks ago. They were ready. Thursday afternoon, Raymond was cleaning the lobby when Kyle Sutherland passed through with 2 clients he was taking to lunch. Kyle did not look at Raymond. He never did. He had worked at Meridian 6 years and had, in that time, spoken to Raymond exactly twice. Once to complain about the cleanliness of the lobby fountain, and once to ask if someone had found a set of car keys. Both times he had addressed the middle distance rather than Raymond's face. As the three men passed, one of the clients, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a red pocket square, held the door for Raymond's cart. Raymond said, "Thank you, sir." The client nodded warmly. Kyle glanced back at Raymond with an expression of mild confusion, as if he found the exchange puzzling. They walked out. The door closed. Raymond stood in the lobby for a moment. Friday came, 7:50 in the morning. Ashley Brennan stepped off the elevator onto the 11th floor, with her standing Friday iced coffee from the place 2 blocks over, the one that put her name on the cup wrong every single time, and she corrected it every single time, and she found a piece of paper on her desk. It was not a memo, it was not a performance review, it was a calendar notification, all hands meeting, 17th floor boardroom, 9 A.M. mandatory, leadership present. The notification had been sent from the executive assistant's office at 7 a.m. Brandon found an identical note. Derek Cho found one. Patricia Owens found one. 46 employees in total, all 11 floors, all departments. Kyle Sutherland found his, sat back in his chair, and felt a specific quiet that had no name. The 17th floor boardroom had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the James River. The tables seated 30. The rest stood. By 8:58, the room was full, and the temperature of it was the kind that precedes something. People spoke quietly to each other, eyebrows raised. Nobody from leadership had come in yet. Nobody knew the subject. Kyle Sutherland was in the front row, jacket buttoned, expression neutral in the particular way of a man applying neutral as a policy. Ashley Brennan stood near the window with Brandon, their coffees still in hand, talking about a client presentation scheduled for the following week. She had looked around the room briefly when she entered, scanned the faces, and returned to her conversation. She had not looked for the old man from the hallway. At 9:02, the door at the back of the room opened. Bernard Park, chairman of the board, walked in first. Then Constance Adler, then 2 men in dark suits whom nobody recognized, then 2 people who were very clearly lawyers in the way that lawyers are always clearly lawyers. And then behind them all, in the same gray custodial uniform he had worn every working day for 11 years, moving with that familiar slight drag of the left foot, came Raymond Ellison. The room did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages. First, the people near the door who saw him first. Then the second row, then the window side. Ashley Brennan stopped speaking mid-sentence. Brandon lowered his coffee cup. Kyle Sutherland did not move at all. Raymond walked to the head of the table. He did not hurry. He did not explain. He placed both hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table, stood behind it, and waited while Bernard Park stepped forward. "Good morning," Bernard said. "This meeting was called at the direction of the board and of our company's founder, majority shareholder, and chairman emeritus, who has asked to address the staff directly. I'll introduce him formally for those of you who have not previously had the occasion to meet him." Bernard paused. He looked at the room. "This is Raymond Ellison. There are moments in a room when something fundamental shifts, and everyone in it knows it, and nobody can stop it. This was one of those moments. The silence was the kind that has weight. Someone near the back dropped a pen. The sound of it hitting the floor was enormous. Raymond pulled out the chair and sat down. He folded his hands on the table. He looked around the room slowly, taking his time, the way a man looks around a room he built with his own hands. "I have been a custodian in this building for 11 years, he said. His voice was even and unhurried, "not because I was required to be, because I chose to be, because my grandmother, Harriet Ellison, spent 33 years cleaning other people's buildings, and not one of the people whose offices she cleaned ever learned her name. I decided when I started this company that I would never lead it from a distance. I would walk the floors. I would see what kind of people we were, not what kind of people we told each other we were." He let that land. "What I have seen in 11 years," he continued, "is mostly good. Mostly this is a company of people who are decent to each other and to the people who serve them. Mostly." He looked at the table, but not entirely. He opened a folder that Constance placed in front of him. He did not look up. "I'd like to address 2 matters this morning. The first is a personnel matter. The second is a legal matter." He looked at Kyle Sutherland. "Mr. Sutherland." Kyle did not blink. His jaw moved once, very slightly. The board has been presented with documentation of 31 fraudulent vendor transactions totaling $3,412,000 routed through a shell company incorporated by a member of your family. Federal agents, he nodded toward the two men in dark suits, are present this morning pursuant to an agreement with the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. He looked at Kyle evenly. You are under no obligation to say anything. I would advise you not to. Kyle Sutherland stood up. His face had done something strange in the last 45 seconds, moved through several expressions too quickly, and arrived at indignation. This is completely out of line, he said. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has spent years making decisions in rooms where nobody pushes back. These accusations, if there are documents, I want to see documents. I want my legal team on the phone right now. This is a setup, this is a political move, and I will not sit here and be Mr. Sutherland. Raymond's voice did not rise, it did not sharpen, it did not change in any perceptible way, and yet the room heard it as loudly as a door slamming shut. Kyle stopped speaking. The documents exist, Raymond said. They have existed for some time. They have been reviewed by the board, by two independent forensic accountants, and by the United States Attorney's Office. He looked at Kyle with the same steady attention he had given to every invoice, every wire record, every late-night email printed and filed in Constance's encrypted folder. I am not interested in a confrontation. I am informing you there is a difference. One of the men in dark suits stood and said something very short and quiet. Kyle sat back down. His attorney, reached by 6 minutes later, advised him to say nothing further. Kyle sat in the front row for the rest of the meeting, with his hands folded on the table and his face doing the work of remaining composed, which was its own kind of visible collapse. The room held its breath. Raymond watched Kyle sit down and looked at him with the same expression he had turned on every piece of evidence over the past 6 months. Steady, complete, without fury or satisfaction. The second matter, Raymond said, and now he looked up and let his eyes move across the room with a deliberateness that made several people unconsciously straighten in their chairs. Over the past several months, I have personally witnessed a pattern of conduct on the 11th floor that I will describe plainly. Staff members of this company, employees who clean and maintain this building, were subjected to deliberate humiliation. Their work was interfered with. They were filmed without consent and mocked. They were addressed in a manner that I will not repeat in this room because I believe in the dignity of language. He paused. I was present for a number of these incidents, as was a security camera, 3 of which cover the 11th floor corridor and break room. Ashley Brennan had not moved. Her coffee cup was in her hand, and she appeared to have forgotten it was there. Her face had gone the particular color of someone watching a delayed realization arrive. Ms. Brennan, Raymond said. Her name in his mouth stopped the room like a pin. I have reviewed the conduct documentation with the board's HR committee. Effective today, your employment with Meridian Capital is terminated. The terms of your separation have been prepared by legal counsel and will be available this afternoon. He looked at her without anger, which somehow was worse than anger. I want to say one more thing to you directly, not as a professional matter but as a person. He let a beat of silence fall. My grandmother spent her life being invisible to people like you. She did not let it diminish her. I hope you find at some point the version of yourself that she would have seen when she looked at you. Because she would have looked. She always looked. Ashley opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face that might, in another context, have been the beginning of tears. She pressed her lips together hard. She set her coffee cup on the windowsill. Ashley opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face that might, in another context, have been the beginning of tears. She pressed her lips together hard. She set her coffee cup on the windowsill. She turned to the room as if looking for somewhere to put herself and found only 60 pairs of eyes looking back. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody looked away either. The silence was not cruel. It was simply the silence of people finally, collectively, refusing to pretend they hadn't seen. Brandon Wyatt had gone gray. Raymond did not address him by name, but the documentation package that HR would deliver to his desk that afternoon included a formal written warning, a required management training program, and a 60-day performance improvement plan. He would complete it. He would not be the same person afterward, whether that was growth or just the lasting shock of having the floor fall away. No one could say for certain. Derek Cho in the back of the room let out a long, slow breath through his nose. He had picked up the paper off the floor. He had not done enough, and he knew it, and he would carry that with him. But Raymond had noticed. Constance had made a quiet note 3 days ago. Young analyst, 11th floor, acted without being asked. Raymond had asked Constance to ensure Derek's name was included in the list for the annual mentorship program. He said nothing about it publicly. Patricia Owens sat in the third row with her hands folded in her lap. She stared at the table. Her review was in 3 weeks, and she already knew what she was going to say when they asked her if there was anything she wanted to flag. She had been practicing the sentence in her head since Wednesday. Kyle Sutherland was escorted from the building at 10:17 a.m. He declined to speak to anyone. The 2 agents were professional and quiet, and the whole thing took less than 8 minutes. His assistant, who had suspected something for months and had never been sure enough or brave enough to say it, watched from her desk and felt a complicated relief she would not be able to articulate for weeks. 3 months passed. Meridian Capital's assets under management grew by 11% in the quarter following the restructuring. 2 institutional clients who had been considering reducing their positions called Bernard Park to say they were staying. One said, "What you have at that company is rare. Most boards would have buried it." Kyle Sutherland pleaded guilty in federal court to wire fraud and money laundering. He was sentenced to 58 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution. He gave one interview through his attorney in which he expressed remorse. Raymond attended the sentencing. He sat in the gallery 3 rows back in a dark blue suit and no tie. When they led Kyle out, Kyle looked back once and found Raymond's face in the crowd. Raymond looked at him without expression. Not with coldness, not with triumph, with recognition. "I saw you. I always saw you." Kyle looked at the floor and did not look back again. Ashley Brennan did not leave Richmond. She moved to a smaller firm across town, a roll 2 steps down from where she had been. She had the professional references she had built over 4 years, and she was stripped of the position and the building and the iced coffee she dumped on other people's floors, competent. She knew she was competent. She also knew now the specific shape of what she had done. That knowledge was not comfortable. It was not meant to be. 6 weeks after her termination, she wrote a letter, not to Raymond, to the 3 members of the custodial staff she had treated poorly over 4 years. She wrote 3 separate letters, handwritten, no excuses. She sent them through Meridian's HR department with a request that they be forwarded. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only said, "You deserved better than what I gave you." George Torres, who had requested the transfer and written that he no longer felt like a person on that floor, received his letter on a Tuesday morning. He read it twice. He folded it. He put it in his desk drawer. He did not respond. He did not need to. Something in him, something quiet and sore, unknotted very slightly. In October, Raymond announced the Harriet Ellison Foundation, $1.5 million in initial endowment, scholarships for the children and grandchildren of custodial workers, food service workers, hotel housekeeping staff, and building maintenance employees anywhere in the state of Virginia. 31 scholarships in the first year, 1 for every year he had run the company. At the dedication ceremony, he stood at a podium in a conference room rented from a downtown hotel, not Meridian's boardroom, intentionally because he wanted neutral ground that belonged to no hierarchy. 300 people, recipients, parents, his board. Gloria Sims from the mailroom, who sat in the front row and kept her hands folded in her lap and smiled like someone watching something they had always believed would eventually happen. Raymond read from his grandmother's journal. She had kept one for 40 years. He had never shown it to anyone. He read 2 pages, the entry from the day in 1961 in the department store and the entry from exactly 1 year later, in which she had written, "I wonder sometimes if they see the floors I clean. I wonder if they know those floors hold them up. I hope someday someone remembers." He read it clearly and evenly until the last sentence when his voice went somewhere it hadn't gone in public before. He waited, he breathed, he finished. The room stood. On the marble wall of the Meridian lobby, 2 new photographs were mounted beside the company's founding documents. The first was a professional portrait of Raymond Ellison, circa 1993, young in a suit, smiling in the specific way of someone who has just signed papers on a building he intends to outlast. The second photograph was a woman in a gray cleaning uniform, her hair in a net, her eyes direct and calm and bright. The inscription beneath it read, Harriet Ellison, 1917-1988. She raised a man who paid attention. 6 months after the all-hands meeting, Raymond Ellison put on the gray uniform again. It was a Monday. He took the service elevator to the 7th floor. He loaded his cart in the supply closet the way he had for 11 years. The first person who saw him was a young analyst, 24 years old, 3 months at the firm, who nearly walked into him coming around a corner. She stopped. She said, "Good morning." She paused, then Mr. Ellison, "Good morning." She was embarrassed and earnest in equal measure. Raymond smiled, not the polished smile from the photograph, the real one. "Call me Raymond." She smiled back. She went to her desk. She told the person next to her what had just happened. By 9, half the floor had come by, one at a time, to say good morning. Some of them had been in the boardroom that day. Some hadn't. None of them looked past him. All of them used his name. Around 10:30, a new hire, 22 years old, first real job, who had started the previous week and had not yet heard the story because he had been at training in Baltimore, rounded the corner and found Raymond struggling to lift a heavy trash liner out of an industrial bin. The new hire set down his bag. He said, "Here, sir, let me get that end." Raymond looked at him. The young man had no idea who he was. He was simply doing what a person does when someone nearby needs a hand. Raymond let him help. They lifted the bag together. The young man said, "There you go," and picked up his bag and kept walking. Raymond watched him go. He pressed his lips together and breathed through his nose once. He thought about his grandmother at her kitchen table, doing arithmetic with him under a lamp that buzzed slightly, her hands smelling of gardenia lotion and industrial cleaner. He thought about what she would have said about this building, about these floors, about the young man who had just helped without asking why. She would have said, "That's the whole thing, Raymond. That's all of it right there." Down in the lobby on a Friday just after the quarterly payroll ran, Gloria Sims from the mailroom received her paycheck the same way she always, printed and delivered to her desk because she had opted out of direct deposit 20 years ago, and nobody had ever suggested she change. She opened it. She looked at the bottom right corner, the signature, Raymond Ellison, she had known for 8 years. She had kept his secret. She smoothed the check against her desk. She took the small yellow sticky note from her pad and wrote, without overthinking it, still watching. Still proud, she left it on his cart in the supply closet. He found it at the end of the day. He stood in the supply closet for a moment, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the door propped open onto an empty hallway. He folded the note carefully along its existing crease. He opened his brass tin. He placed it inside, on top of all the others. He closed the tin. He turned off the light. He walked out. If this story moved you, not because of what happened at the end, but because you recognized something true in the middle of it, hit the like button. It costs nothing, but it's how these stories find the people who need them. Share it with someone who forgets, sometimes, that the person holding the mop is also a person. And leave a comment. Have you ever walked past someone and then thought later that you should have stopped? I read everyone.